If you've got some painting to do inside your house this year, then you're gonna wanna make sure that you use the appropriate primers so you don't end up with an uneven finish or paint that fails altogether. Yo, what's cracking folks? Jeremy Vassar here, and I've been painting professionally for over 20 years, and I've had my share of issues finding the right primer for the job. In this video, I'm gonna show you 5 interior rooms which all require different primers. I'll show you what I used, why I used them, what happens if you don't, and the end result. Let's get into room number 1, shall we? All right, so the first room we're looking at is this renovated kitchen slash family room. It all kind of blended together as one big room. The walls and the ceiling were new drywall, and those are the main areas that need to get primed. If you don't prime those areas, then what you'll see that happens when you go over it with just your finish paint is all of the seams where there's been drywall mud applied and sanded are gonna show through because those the drywall mud is very porous and it's gonna suck in paint differently than the rest of the drywall. And also the drywall is just gonna look uneven and it's not a good look. And just keep in mind the goal of priming is to prepare whatever surface you're gonna be painting so that when you apply your finish paint, you end up with a smooth and uniform looking finish. So to accomplish that, the recommended primer for this job is a PVA primer, and PVA stands for polyvinyl acetate. Doesn't matter that you know that, but there you go. What's great about PVA primer is it's super inexpensive. It's widely available. You can get it at Lowe's, Home Depot, or any paint store. It's relatively easy to apply. It's a little bit looser than your typical wall paint, but it's not too bad. But what it does is it seals in the pores in the new drywall and the drywall mud, preparing it for paint. Also, most PVA primers have an eggshell-like finish, so when you go over top of it with your finish paint, you get really good spread. And a little pro tip for you, I'd recommend using the same nap of roller for the primer that you're gonna use for your finish coats of paint as well. So I went with the Pro Doozy FTP from Worcester in 1/2 inch, and that's what I use to roll on my ceiling paint and my wall paint as well. Because as soon as you start rolling product onto new drywall, that's where the texture starts to build. So you just want to stay consistent throughout your whole process so you get, again, that nice uniform finish. So next up, we've got room number 2, and that is a typical bedroom repaint, which usually when you come in to do a repaint on a bedroom, it means all the surfaces have been previously painted. But again, when you go to repaint, you're probably gonna have some spackle spots, some drywall repair, other things that you have filled like nail holes or nail pops, things like that. You end up with spackle spots or drywall mud kind of all over the place, and then once that's sanded down, you're left with kind of all those patches everywhere. So if you don't prime those areas, what you'll see is the repaired areas will flash through, or they'll show through your top coats. So if you look at the wall, you're gonna notice exactly where you've done those repairs, which is not what you're going for. The recommended primer for this application is a multi-purpose primer. Again, these are ubiquitous and sold almost everywhere. And what a multi-purpose primer does is it fills in all of the pores of the repaired area, and it's also quite a bit thicker than a PVA primer. It's a little bit easy to work with. Pro tip for this section is that some folks are tempted to use the wall paint as a primer, particularly a lot of the paints nowadays say it's paint and primer in one, and the joke in the paint industry is that paint and primer in one was invented in the marketing department, not in the chemistry lab, because it's not a real thing. If you want to guarantee that your repairs don't flash through your top coats, just use a primer. I guarantee you will have better results than just going straight over it with your wall paint. And that's what we did in this process as well. We sanded down all our repaired areas, hit it with a multi-purpose primer, and then went over it with our top coats. I know the world of primers can be quite confusing. There are about as many primers as there are types of paints, which is to say there's a crap ton. If you'd like a concise list of our recommended primers and where to use them, check out the link in the description and we'll get that right over to you. Onward to room number 3, and boy howdy, that was a doozy. So this is a family room, and there was a lot going on with this one. There was a lot of different types of damage in the ceiling. So we had water damage that came through the skylights, which we see all the time, and that leaked down the ceiling in various places. We also had some water damage around some of the hi-hat lighting, which we see a lot. So you get a lot of discoloration in the ceiling, and it kind of turns this brown color, which doesn't look great. And so there was just a lot going on. There was also some like Sharpies that were written on the ceiling. Full disclosure, in this room particularly was my parents' house that my brother and I repainted. And I drew on the walls with the Sharpie to demonstrate this exact thing we're about to go over. The big thing with those, all of the things that I mentioned, is that if you don't prime them, again, it's gonna bleed through, particularly the water damage and the Sharpie and things like that. They'll come right through your wall paint or your ceiling paint if they're not primed properly. With this particular type of damage or marks on the wall, you gotta use some a little bit more substantial products. So what we recommend for this application is Ben shellac or spray kills, depending on how big the area is that you need to prime. Both of these products are a little bit aggressive to use because they are not waterborne, so the fumes are just going to be way more aggressive. The bin is a shellac-based primer and the Spray Kills is oil-based. I would recommend using a respirator that's got these pink filters on it. That really helps out with the fumes. And if you can keep air moving in the area as well, that's a solid move. And a little pro tip when you're using Kills, once you're done, turn the can upside down, depress the nozzle until the paint coming out turns clear and it's just kind of gas coming out. What that does is prevent the nozzle from clogging up with paint, so the next time you go to use it, it actually will work and come out of the can. And I've ruined many a Kills can by not doing that. But yeah, for this ceiling, we bin shellacked most of the water damage, and then we Spray Kills some of the water damage around the hi-hat light and as well as the spots in the ceiling that had the marker on it. And then we went over it with our 2 top coats of our ceiling paint and it worked out great. All right, next up is room number 4, and this was a dining room that had wallpaper all over the walls as well as stained trim. And what the client wanted is the wallpaper removed, the walls painted, and then also the trim converted from stained trim to painted. And I'll take those one at a time. If you don't prime the walls after you've removed wallpaper, a lot of times when you remove wallpaper, it's gonna tear up the drywall a little bit. So you might actually tear through the top layer of drywall depending on how well the wallpaper was applied and how you've removed it. Also, there's gonna be glue residue on the walls. And if you just paint right over that, the glue will actually re-wet and rehydrate with the paint, and then you get this weird kind of crackly look and it just looks like balls. And then with converting stained trim to painted, if you just go over it with a trim paint, 1, you might have adhesion issues if it's been polyurethaned, and then 2, you're gonna get tannin bleed through, or the stain is just gonna show through, and you're gonna have to do an ungodly amount of top coats with your trim paint to get that to look uniform. So both those things you want to avoid, which brings me to one of my favorite products. Boom, Fresh Start Primer from Benjamin Moore, and you can get this at Benjamin Moore or Ace Hardware. But this has been one of my newish favorite products that we've used over the last like 2.5 or 3 years or so. What's great about this is a latex-based product. It is not oil-based, which means it is much more pleasant to work with. It's very thick, so it goes on like a thick wall paint. For the wallpaper application, we just put a coat on after we stripped down the wallpaper, and that's sealed in everything. And then we went ahead and did our drywall repair. So we did our joint compound and spackle and everything, and then sanded everything out. Once the repairs were done and sanded, we reapplied another coat of primer and then went over it with our top coats of wall paint. And then for the trim, we did a coat of Fresh Start. After that, we did caulk wood putty on all that stuff and then went over it with our trim paint, and that worked out wonderfully. And lastly, in room number 5, we've got a living room, and the big thing in this room was the accent wall. A lot of this stuff had been previously painted, but the accent wall had a lot of work done to it. You can see all this kind of cool fancy woodwork that they had done by the carpenters, but there was a lot of different textures on that wall that we needed to look uniform when we were done. So you've got the previously painted wall that's behind all of that woodwork. There was a lot of drywall repair behind it. There was some new drywall in there as well. Then you had all of the primed wood that was used to kind of make that pattern, but then a lot of where the wood came together had been sanded down, was actually down to the raw wood. And also on this wall, we had a big color shift. Since it was going to be an accent wall, it was going to be quite a bit darker than the rest of the room. If you don't prime a surface like that that's got all those different textures going on, what will happen is each one of those things that I mentioned will take the paint differently than the other section, and it's going to look blotchy and gross. And then with the big color shift, you would end up having to do an ungodly amount of top coats with your finish paint to get it to look halfway decent, especially if you're using something like a dark red or a navy blue or something. So the recommended primer for this application, what I used on this job, was Fresh Start Primer, but I had it tinted a really dark gray. And my pro tip for this section here is, if you're gonna have an accent color and it's gonna be pretty dark and you're gonna use gray primer, I would recommend having the gray primer tinted slightly darker than your accent color. So that's what we did for this job. I went over it with 1 coat of the dark gray Fresh Start and then hit it with 2 top coats of our finish paint, which was Emerald Matte, and everything looked uniform and super spiffy. Yeah, the client was pumped about it and everybody was super stoked. Now that you know which primers to use where, and again, if you need the written list, then you can grab that primer guide in the description. We really did try and make that useful. Anyways, you've got the primers nailed down. You want to make sure that you use the appropriate sheen in each room. You can check that video out right over here. And until next time, y'all take it easy, work smart, and have a good one. Peace.